Hello and welcome to the first in our new AI Guardian webinar series. This is a new monthly webinar series that we're launching here at Bigeye, which is focusing on the challenges, successes, changes that we're all seeing in the AI landscape, and also each month highlighting some of the leaders who are at the heart of kind of navigating some of those challenges. So today we're kicking off the series very appropriately by looking at a piece of research that Bigeye conducted with BARC at the back end of last year, which looked at the learnings from 400 plus enterprises who have been leading AI initiatives. And as Shawn will share with us, it actually has a particular slice on the differences that when AI leaders are in place, that makes to the actual outcomes that people see. So just a quick preview of some of the things that we'll be discussing as we get into the research. So our agenda for the discussion today, I will very shortly introduce you to my fellow panelists here. We're going to dig in and give you some kind of highlights of that research, and then focus on some of the key questions that come out of that, and what are the learnings that we can take from that direct experience that people like Danielle here have in bringing these AI projects into production. And then stick with us, because if you have been intrigued or your interest has been piqued by some of the statistics that we've shared, you'll be able to get access to that research at the end of the webinar. Okay. So firstly, let me introduce myself. So Eleanor Treharne-Jones, I'm the CEO of Bigeye, an enterprise AI trust company. And I'm delighted to be joined here by Danielle who is currently Executive Vice President of Digital Strategy at WNS, has also been the Chief Data Officer at Albertsons and American Express. So leading so many of these types of initiatives. Danielle, tell us a little bit more about your career path through the data world.
Yeah, I would say that there's one continuous theme through all of my roles, which is transformation using data and digital to transform entire areas of business, all the way from starting off in fraud risk, all the way through the chief data officer roles at Amex and Albertsons, and just a lot of transformation roles throughout that. And so this is not new to me. Now I'm on agentic transformation.
We are just in the next transformation. We're transforming our environment, and let alone the different roles that we take towards it. Thank you for joining us today. And then also delighted to introduce Shawn Rogers, who's the CEO of BARC here in the US, the research firm, and was also the author or co-author of the research that we produced. Shawn, tell us a little bit about your background in the data space.
My background is kind of long, nearly 30 years now in our data-driven industry. I started on the print side, so I'm one of the co-founders of DM Review magazine that probably some folks in the audience remember. And I've been an analyst for a good portion of my career. When I wasn't working as an analyst, I got to work as an end user, and I also worked for enterprise software companies. So I get to put a foot in all sides of the fence today. BARC is a research-led analyst firm, and as you've mentioned, we're going to share some of our research today with the group and make it available for everybody here at the end of the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining us. Looking forward to the discussion. And you can obviously put questions into the chat. So if you want to join in, then please do share your questions with us during the webinar as well. Okay, so Shawn, I'm going to let you talk about the research because you are much more familiar with it than I am. So please take us through, what the objectives were, what a little bit about the methodology, because I'm sure people will always have questions around that. And also, this was the second year that you'd run this survey, which enables us to have some very interesting comparisons between last year and this year in a rapidly changing space. So tell us a little bit more about the survey.
Yeah, absolutely. Lessons from the leading edge, successful delivery of Gen AI and AI is where we focused. And what we were trying to learn was very different from what we were attempting to learn nearly 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we asked about the same size global audience, what they planned to do and what they were initially beginning to do around AI. And everybody that's listening knows that 2 years in the AI space is like going back to the Stone Age. So we had to ask, roughly 18 months later, very much similar questions, but in the context of what have you done? What have you accomplished? What challenges did you really bump into? Where were your expectations and what did you learn along the way? So I think AI being such a popular topic right now and almost distracting at some levels, it's really interesting to hear what your peers, for the folks that are listening today, your peers, your competition, what they're actually accomplishing and doing. So that was the big focus on it. But we wanted to come away with a deeper understanding of what's actually happening. And to my Stone Age comment, we published this report in the last 60 days. So it's only 5 years old for AI, I guess. So, which is good. It's very pertinent and very up to date.
Fantastic. And I hinted at it when we did the introductions, but you actually found some quite interesting findings between what's happening when you have a data, an AI leader in place and when you don't. Yeah. So I don't think it's on the next slide. So perhaps you could give us a little bit of insight into that.
One of the ways, it's a great thing to surface. So we liked in our first piece of research and as well as this most recent one, we tried to understand how the industry is maturing and the differences between AI leaders and maybe followers or laggards, whichever you prefer. When you look at the 421 global respondents to this piece of research, we found that roughly 20% of them were executing extremely well across 7 really critical areas of AI success. I'm going to read the list fast, but you'll get it when you download the report. Where leaders are people who have identified AI leadership and ownership in their org, have an AI program, standards and policies in place. They have project governance and oversight, which is incredibly important. They have made the purchases necessary and deployed them in their enterprise architecture. They have taken legal considerations into thinking security standards and compliance. And lastly, they have the right data policies and access pieces in place. So if you take away some things today, this is one of the points. A leader is a company who has fully deployed all 7 of those areas and built a foundation for AI success. The big thing we see in the market when disruptive tech comes along is we all get distracted. There's a fear of missing out. We scramble and do things quickly. And we likely fail quickly if we don't build a foundation. So the differences and comparisons that we see amongst the leaders and the followers are quite stark and interesting and a good takeaway for all of you on today's call. And we'll explore some of that and I'll comment on it when we go through the rest of the presentation.
Fantastic. And I think we're now going to highlight a couple of key findings from the research. Yeah. This one was particularly interesting. In that data quality was highlighted as the #1 barrier to AI success.
Yep.
44% listed as their top obstacle. What I found most striking about this, though, was the shift. Because when you ran this research the previous year, only 19% of people highlighted it. I mean, it was almost in the bottom 3. It went from like the bottom 3 to being the top concern. And it was such a powerful kind of demonstration of how priorities change from when you're thinking about something to when you're actually trying to execute. And so as people have gone from that planning process to actually, putting AI pilots into production, they've hit different hurdles to what they thought they would.
Absolutely. And it was an incredible aha moment when we got the results of the second piece. And you recapped it quite well. The expectation was kind of middle. They weren't super concerned about it when we spoke to the panel previously. And as you said, it was ranked middle to low. It wasn't expected to be a big problem. Reality set in when they started to deploy projects. So the 421 people that we spoke to here were people that have deployed projects. So that was one of our qualifiers to participate in this research. We wanted to know what you've done. And as they were doing, they ran into a colossal roadblock around how important the quality of their data is. And to jump from, or double basically 19 to 44% was interesting. And it was the #1 challenge globally for people that are working to bring AI to the market. So another great takeaway for the group today, if you are ignoring your data quality issues, as often happens in the enterprise, I urge you to pump your brakes and reconsider, because you're about to hit a significant roadblock for certain.
We'll talk about this a bit more as we get into the meat of the questions as well. Another big finding, as people started, as the rubber hit the road, was costs. So definitely, a takeaway that people hadn't budgeted, or perhaps didn't know how to budget for all the different components of the cost of delivering AI in production. So again, that was a very striking finding from the.
And it changed a lot, Eleanor, from how they expected it to happen.
Different problems, different costs.
Absolutely. So I will say this leader and follower idea, we saw in our first piece of research that leaders got to the cost barrier concern faster than the rest of everybody else. So if you're sitting there wondering, hey, how am I doing on those 7 things Shawn listed? Are we sort of a leader, sort of a follower? If you are a leader, you are doing more, you're deploying more often, and you are bumping into the rising costs of AI. So there are a lot of things to remediate that. Software cost is the top of that list for leaders. So leaders got past the initial barriers to AI, like skill set things and training and finding the right team members, like prompt engineers and AI engineers and so on. They jumped past that pretty quickly, and they immediately bumped into this prohibitive cost side. And there's lots of ways to address it. And it's connected to many different things in your architecture, but it is something that leaders find problematic almost out of the gates as they start to deploy.
And I know from talking to lots of, AI leaders myself, that often these AI initiatives are driven as part of a cost saving measure from, senior leadership. And so sometimes there's actually no budget attached, because this is going to drive efficiency and save money. And so I think that's another interesting finding, very helpful if you're, looking at running your own, projects at the moment and how you position that internally, that understanding that there are costs as well as efficiencies, and that kind of ROI discussion is an important part of kind of, setting things up from the outset.
I absolutely agree. I think whenever we bump into disruptive and innovative technology, we always have some blinders on. We saw this when big data was a big thing, and everybody kind of scrambled to figure out how to do it. And then they realized that, they probably weren't going to shut down their data warehouse and their organized and relational data sources, but that Hadoop and unstructured data would live in their environment. What we're starting to see now is a bit of a mature approach to AI. Companies are bringing in smaller language models, domain-specific models. They're applying different processes and technologies to build context and accuracy within their AI practice, but all of it costs money to some level. And so strategic choices there are really important. And I'm going to skip to the other bullet on this page, Eleanor, because data lineage, observability, and monitoring, I don't have a comparative number from one piece of research to the other, because honestly, it wasn't in the radar as high 2 years ago with respect to AI. As a technology, it's been around for a long time. And we found that only 33% of the companies that were responding have added that to their technology stack. And we see that as one of the fastest growing sectors, that and data trust platforms and the utilization of MCP, these servers that help agents and AI do better. So again, new technology finding a way into the path. Some technology like the one in front of us, incredibly critical. You probably or should have it somewhere in your ecosystem, but you're going to need it to do AI.
Absolutely. You mentioned data trust as we came in, and that leads us nicely onto our next kind of question. Danielle, I'd love to bring you in here. Why is trust such a limiting factor? We talked about quality being a limiting factor. I think the two are very closely related. But as you move from, the pilot to production and then ultimately scale, what have you seen as you've been looking at this?
Yeah, I think that what happens is that in the pilot stage, you can, really curate, even manually clean, for the data to do the pilot on. And so it works well then. And then when you get into actually scaling it into production systems where things are messy, dynamic, evolving, with lots of different edge cases, things go wrong. And much of that has to do with the data quality and these edge cases where you aren't anticipating the data issues. And so I think that, getting to scalability requires, reproducibility of events. And in order to do that, you need the right data quality behind it. And you need the right, not only inputs of data, but outputs of data and feedback mechanisms, particularly for mission critical and highly regulated workflows, right? And how do you, and beyond that, what you guys just mentioned, how do you estimate the costs in a pilot? If you're curating everything and making it, right, you can't estimate what your compute costs are actually going to be. In a couple of our use cases, we've actually found that pilots went really well, but when we put them into production, the compute cost was actually higher than the original people cost. And so that that's really essential to how you do pilots. It's not just about, does it work? Does it not hallucinate? Does it give you the reproducibility and consistency that you want? But also, is it really cost effective?
Have you been able to restructure or think about how you do pilots to try and better align with what you've seen in production? Did that kind of feed back into your process?
Absolutely. I think that one of the key things that our chief AI researcher, delivered was the ability for us to take a look at which models were the most, effective and efficient and cost, lowest cost for which tasks. Because you can look at every single model, right? And there's so many of them coming out and more coming out every day. But the ongoing monitoring of whether or not that model change, has really made a difference in the cost or latency, et cetera. So really looking at those key metrics around the deep aspects of the model and what task and what agent you're using those models with, because not all those models are good at all tasks.
Mm-hmm. I mean, AI isn't the right thing for all tasks.
Right.
We're talking generative AI here, but no, for all tasks either. So that's been a challenge that we've seen as well, where people are just like, I need to do an AI initiative as opposed to I have a problem to solve, and which aspects of that does it make the most sense for AI to be the solution. Shawn, what's your thoughts on? You mentioned this, some of the rising, accelerating elements, things like lineage, data trust. What have you seen in terms of why that's a limiting factor?
Well, I think it's kind of common for those of us who've been around for a while. We've seen these innovation cycles come and go, and in the initial parts, and honestly, we're still kind of in the initial parts of the early stage of adoption of AI and the maturity of it. And so we have this tendency, and Eleanor, you just talked about it. We see that over 35% of boards, the board of directors for companies, are mandating to the company that they need to do AI. So when the pressure comes downhill from the very, very top on a topic like this, hysteria ensues. People run up and down the hallway going, oh my goodness, we have to do AI. And they don't always vet it, and they start to make these functional or foundational errors. Danielle just made a good point that in a POC, you use a small amount of data, but then scaling it becomes more difficult. I asked a question of a large group of people, an audience at an event recently, and I said, is AI finally the thing that's going to go ahead and cause you to stop, pump your brakes, and fix your data? And the answer was no, it's not. And that's a cultural issue. But as solution providers make it easier for the onboarding of good content and the good data quality practices that are governed and are kind of enveloped in the right frameworks, it'll allow everybody to go quicker in a successful sort of way. And right now, we all read anecdotal research about the low success rate of projects. And I think, going to the core of your question, Eleanor, lack of these foundational solutions and programs is what causes a lot of that failure. I don't think it's AI itself or machine learning itself or Gen AI itself. It's really the surrounding environment and people being a little less practical than they ought to be when they rush off to do a project. I saw a great question in the comments about use cases, and we have 2 huge charts of the most popular use cases. And what we're seeing is, from a use case standpoint, and I think this is interesting, companies, end users are augmenting existing programs and solutions and processes that they have in place, and they're adding AI in a smart way. And I think that that's a really good strategy. Add it incrementally, attach it to solutions that are critical and work within your environment, because generally speaking, the quality of the data from those projects has already been vetted to some level.
Danielle, do you have any thoughts on use cases that you've found to be particularly valuable, or where AI has been particularly valuable to solving them?
I think that the most important thing on use cases is to really go back to, as an enterprise, go back to your business capabilities and determine which ones actually have the greatest, market opportunity, right? Before you then go into use cases. I think people have a tendency to start with, it's great to start with your day-to-day job and, automate tasks, right? And become more efficient and do more work. That's fantastic. But if you really want to have, impact into the P&L of your organization, you have to look at what drives that P&L of the organization and develop your use cases around that. And so it really depends on the vertical and the type of organization, which use cases are most valuable.
Yep. Makes complete sense. We've talked a lot about what AI brings, but agentic AI also brings new risks. So there's a question here around model drift and concept drift. How can continuous observability and governance help mitigate some of those new risks that come from agentic AI?
I'll dive in first. I'm a huge fan of the automated outputs and actions that agentic AI can bring to the enterprise. And we're already seeing some really interesting things. But when you are running agents in an unrestrained or ungoverned environment, you are asking for problems. And there's a lot of topics that have to do with risk with agents. Where are the humans in your loop, and how often are they interacting with the outputs and the goals of an agent? Are you able to watch agents in an automated way to make sure that they're not drifting off their primary goals, or that they are starting to make decisions in an environment that is outside your risk parameters and so on? So agent execution drift is a thing. The data underneath the agent sometimes will help them drift and go off and do interesting things. My little joke about agents in general is that agent chaos is happening. For those of you who aren't aware of it, it's happening in your organization. Danielle, I'm sure you're going to have input here because you work with such huge firms. I talked to a global bank a couple of weeks ago, and the executive in charge of AI is concerned because they think they have 20,000 agents that are outside of the restrictions of their governance models. This is not the only place this is happening. And, like I said, Danielle, I'm sure you've got input on this topic, but it's a little scary right now. I think it's exciting, but it's a little scary.
So, hi everyone, my apologies. My dog is very unhappy with what's going on outside that I'm unable to control with construction in the neighborhood. So my apologies for that. So I would say that, the main thing that I see with the risk of agentic is that it does work that's previously impossible and unprecedented for humans to do, right? So that creates entirely new risks, and it just amplifies errors across events. So let's just let me give you a little bit more about why I think this way. If you look at where the researchers are letting agents kind of run wild in the ecosystem, like AGI Town, and there's other places like this, you can see behaviors where one agent hallucinates a little, it feeds another agent. So basically one agent is prompting another agent with a hallucination, then the hallucination gets bigger, it gets bigger. And if these are rewriting, data in your backend, this is a huge problem, right? So I think that that's where, we have new risks that we've never had, at least at speed and scale that we've never had before. Think of it as a telephone game on steroids, right? So I think, observability, guardrails, human in the loop, all of these things are going to continue to be important. And how much you can actually automate those and make them, do work at scale, I think we still have yet to determine in many of these agent-to-agent situations.
I think we're already heading into this next question around how we can proactively kind of detect and remediate these issues before they impact accuracy or risk. One thing we talked about previously is not all risks are equal, though. So I do think, you talked about human in the loop, Shawn, but I do think there is some concept of, tiering, the risks, and then what type of prevention control solutions that you need based on the level of risk.
Yep. I going back to the human in the loop thing, I get asked often by our clients, how do we deploy this? When do we deploy it? And for me, there's a couple of things. One is how fast is the automated or the process that you're part of, right? Is it sub-second? You can't fit a human into it. Is there a bigger delay where a human can interact? And then the second part that has to kind of be the dominating factor is how risky is this process? Are you lending money in this process? Are you determining risk of fraud during this process? Are there elements of the outputs that are coming from the agentic workflow that a human just has to look at and absorb, and that maybe you need to slow your process down a little bit? Just because you can go at the speed of light doesn't mean you should. So you should weigh the speed and the risk at the same time and determine how important and critical it is to have a human in the loop. You're going to have some really tactical agents working in your enterprise, very unmonitored, very automatically, and that's fantastic. They're going to do chores that save us time and money, but you're going to have to be careful when you get to these heavier things. And Danielle, I know with your expertise in the financial markets, you know more about risk than I do, and agents can play a pretty interesting role there.
I think what we've been navigating some of this from a technology perspective, as we've introduced, runtime controls through our AI Guardian. It's been working through with our, kind of customers and design partners when they want that to be a kind of automatic, blocking motion, and when you want it to be a notification, something that advises a human in order that they can take an action. And so trying to, we've been focused on how do we build a solution that meets those different requirements. As you say, they're based on both, a number of variables, but both speed and level of risk are two of the critical criteria.
Yeah, both of them are very important to take into consideration.
Yeah, I think that another, thing another piece of advice I would give enterprises is, while the risk, managing the risk is really important, I think a lot of organizations have taken the almost to the nth degree risk approach. which is putting them behind. And so just as an example, one of the enterprises that I'm very familiar with, they, just to get GitHub Copilot for their developers, they had to go through 27 different committees. Okay, so I would say in this case, don't reinvent the wheel, right? Like, you already have risk processes. You already have the ability to say, like, this use case is more risky than this use case. So make sure that you are still using the risk frameworks you have within your organization, and your model risk governance processes and all those things that you guys already have. Don't reinvent the wheel. Take those things, take the principles behind them, and then extrapolate and use them within this new model universe, right? Don't try to, because a lot of them are thinking this is, they go, oh, this is entirely different. Yes and no, right? Let's go back to the first principles and apply them so that you're not reinventing the entire process and the entire wheel. You don't, yes, you need to, you're already, if you already have ML models in your organization, you are already monitoring drift. You know how to do this. So think about how you're going to do it with a human in the loop model, because generative AI is qualitative, not quantitative, right? But you can still use the same mechanisms, feedback loops, and principles that you've been using before. So if you take all of that and then you add in, high quality graph rag with the right data behind it, you can significantly reduce your risks.
Eleanor, I'll add a data point to the conversation that everybody will see when they download the report. Only 25% of you that are listening, give or take, are probably in full production based on our numbers with agents. The same number of you are in limited production. You're testing, you're experimenting, and so on. And then 16% of you are still in kind of POC mode. So I know around agentic AI and agents in general, there's a lot of pressure that FOMO, fear of missing out. Don't let it bother you too much. The train really hasn't left the station, and it's better to do agentic AI correctly than it is to do it fast and fail publicly. The joke for analysts is we write articles every year on big failures around tech. Don't be in Shawn's article at the end of the year. It's not a good thing.
You neither want to be in Shawn's article, nor do you want to be in Danielle's case study with the 27 committees. So you just want to be somewhere in the middle, and we're here to help you get to that point.
Exactly.
I think in the research, you framed this concept of kind of, trustworthy AI or enterprise grade trust. What does that look like in practice? How do you know whether you've reached that baseline? Shawn, love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're there yet, Eleanor, but there are practical solutions in the marketplace that are helping accuracy and lower hallucinations. So, and that can be from anywhere as fundamental as controlling data and model bias at the very beginning to make sure that the parts of the process are in alignment, to having things like data trust frameworks so that you fully understand lineage and observability of everything that's feeding into models and being used for the AI processes. It really goes back to, I guess, what I led off with, which is if you're not building the foundational things, you are going to find yourself having problems. You're immediately going to, most of you, by the way, from a use case standpoint, going back to Greg's question from the audience, you all built chatbots last year. Now, as I say that out loud, how many of you are going, and ours is not very good? If yours is not very good, you probably have a model or a data quality issue, or you have a refinement and training issue like Danielle touched on with RAG and other things. You have to have a full-blown approach to this. You can't just go off and build a chatbot on a public model and cross your fingers and hope it works really well. It's not gonna. And we're continuing to see that. I mentioned small and domain models as a source for many of our projects now. There's two reasons those are getting popular: because they have lower cost, and you can refine them easier and populate them with highly specific and contextual content that allows you to lower the number of hallucinations and raise that trust that you're looking for. So yeah, I know many of you are kind of laughing right now going, yep, our chatbot's pretty bad. You got to solve those things before you go and solve giving credit to people with an agent.
Yep. And I would say that, like, if you're in that chatbot world, right, like, and I think in general, I'd say for all use cases, one of the like litmus tests that I think that should be applied is, are you detecting issues before users do? Right. And if that's how, like, I would say the baseline level of what does enterprise grade AI trust look like is if you're detecting issues before users do. If you are not, then you have a lot of work to do. So you need to, be able to demonstrate proactivity, transparency, reproducibility, controls across the entire life cycle, in order to be able to even do that of detecting issues before users do. And I know that there's actually in our world, there's actually very few use cases where we don't have issues with, detecting, like, where users find issues before we detect them. So I do think it's like a baseline, but I don't think a lot of companies are there yet in being able to detect those issues ahead.
So Danielle, I jumped ahead, but yes, it is the absolute foundation is that you can pick stuff up before your users do. That's the foundation of trust. It's been the foundation in the data space. AI is an extension of that, rather than, as you say, bringing in a whole new, completely new concept here.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got that in on the last one.
100%. I was more like, because Shawn was already looking to the future, I was very intrigued. Like, if 2025 was the year of the chatbot development. Now, I know that much of research is about looking back, but as you look forward, what do you see as kind of the next step forward in terms of, in 2026, and what are the kind of foundational investments that run alongside that, the success of those?
I'll add that I think the debate around quality of data and integrated governance and observability, I think is going to quickly come to an end this year, in the sense that you just can't argue with it. Bad data gives you bad outputs. We've all known that since the first time we generated an actual report or a BI dashboard or any of those things. So we're sort of back to basics, in the sense that if you're having a hard time with this, you're going to have an even harder time this year. I got asked by a user recently, well, how do I convince my C-suite or my boss that we need to go back and work on these things, or bring in cool new solutions that help us automate it and do it better? And my suggestion is somewhat snarky, but I'm an analyst. I get to be that way sometimes. You just need to put the word AI in the project name. Because your senior leaders are giving out budget money for AI projects. So for those of you listening and you've got a DQ or a governance problem, just put the word AI in the top of it and resubmit it to the queue, and you're likely to get a little more attention from your bosses. It's the only thing that's going to work. Eleanor touched on this earlier, I think, is don't boil the ocean, in the sense of I'm going to fix all of my enterprise data. You're not going to. We all know that. So focus on highly focused use cases and highly focused data that sits underneath it, with the right type of model. Eleanor, you mentioned compute early on. A lot, we see it in the data. It's one of the top 5 concerns of everybody from a cost standpoint. Make sure you're using the right compute and platforms for this to control your costs. But maturity is going to be the arc, I think, in 2026. So that's where we're seeing the future, for sure.
Yeah. So I would say that 2026 is what I am calling the messy middle of AI. And so I think that the fact that, you and I, Eleanor, talked about that data quality was coming. We talked about this 2 years ago, I think, at Snowflake Summit. We said, like, okay, it's gonna happen, and it did. And I think that in order to kind of clean up the mess, and these always happen, these messy middles always happen if you want to go back and look at history in general purpose technology. Right. So this is in the messy middle is what happens is foundational infrastructure becomes even more important, right? It starts to, those build out starts happening in the messy middle. And so strengthening the foundational aspects of visibility and integrity of your data, making sure it's high quality, well governed. And I would say that this is new to the generative AI with provenance, right? If it's all internal data, great. But if it's external data, you're going to have to really check provenance. Make it, do all the baseline data governance, data management functions that you did in the past. You're going to have to do them again in a different way. And that's okay, right? But if you're not investing in this aspect of it with great tools and great partners, you're going to be left behind.
I love the idea, though, this could be the year that we finally fix this so we can stop talking about it and move on.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, because we've been talking about data quality since we had a terabyte of data in the world. We've been talking about data quality. So I think it's never ending.
Eleanor, we see a resistance to it in the market from a numbers and data standpoint, that leaders are not growing as fast as we would have expected them to this deep into the game. But I do think that 2026 will see a shift there, that more people, more companies will become leaders than are doing it right now, because they are literally bumping into walls. And we just covered why that's important.
Shawn, you mentioned this survey is merely 60 days old, which is 5 years in the AI space. So I have to give an opportunity to, this is changing so quickly. What's happened in the last 60 days that's kind of caught both of your attention since the research came out? Danielle, I'll let you kick off.
Well, you'd have to be sleeping under a rock if you didn't notice the clawbot situation that affected the market dramatically. And it looks like it's coming back to haunt us today, perhaps, as well in the market. So just the development that I think is, really happening, or what's the realization I think that's happening, which a lot of people that were deep in the weeds of this already knew, is that it's the open source aspect of all of this is probably going to win in the end, right? Because the risk of all of this data coming together is too challenging for a SaaS or a VC, company, a startup company to take on. It's going to be way too expensive to manage that risk of bringing all this enterprise data together and managing that. Okay, it's making decisions on that, or it's deciding what the next task is in a task planner. And so the open source, I think the big change that's happened in the last is it's become very clear that the open source, with governance, with the right tooling behind that governance, is what's going to win. And it's going to be a struggle in the longer term for the SaaS and the startup, particularly in the orchestration space. So I think that has become a lot more clear in the last 3 weeks than it was before then.
Shawn, what's caught your attention in the last 60 days?
I would say topically, all the new technologies that are popping up are just crazy to try to keep track of. As you can see from the color of my beard, I am not 19 years old. I've been in our market for a long time, and I've never had to work this fast and this hard to keep pace with the innovation technology. So I think that, just as a blanket statement, is really big. Semantic layers and metadata layers and deeper understanding of what the data is, provenance of the data, lineage of the data, all of those things are going to be extraordinarily critical. But as a trend, we are experiencing nonstop conversations around semantic layer and metadata layers. And it's coming from a lot of the different solution providers in the space who know how important adding context for accuracy is. And this goes to data governance and trust data frameworks, and all of these things are encompassing there. So I really do think that's going to be the big awakening this year, is how important that topic is.
As an example of how fast this is all moving, is I think the first time I saw or heard of Knowledge Graph RAG was in maybe late October, November, right? And now it's in everything. That's how fast things are. This was a novel, new thought. It was, people had thought about it, but it didn't really exist in a form that was usable. Not only does it went from barely existing in a form that was usable to being like in every product within a few months. That's amazing. That's unheard of in tech history, right? So I think if we just keep in mind, like, it's like, this is moving super fast. You got to keep on top of it. You really do need to have dedicated resources to keep on top of it, because you won't if you don't.
I think we spent a lot of time in this webinar talking about like the table stakes of, you know, data quality, the kind of foundational governance elements. But I think, Shawn, as you highlighted, really that's about making sure that it's safe and trusted. And then the semantic layer and the context is about making sure that it's actually good, you know, and it's driving, you know, real outcomes that are enhanced within the business. So as we evolve through this, well, part of the point of this webinar series is to kind of keep track of some of these changes. So if you do kind of, you know, register for future webinars, because we'll be keeping pace with these topics, or doing our best to keep up with the changing landscape as we see it. So I think we've picked up on a lot of the questions as we've gone through. So thank you for those that have sent them in. I will just jump to this slide, because we did promise at the beginning that you would be able to download a copy of the research that we've been talking about. So do use the QR code to make sure that you can access your copy. And also, if you're interested in finding out more about Bigeye and our AI trust platform, then the QR code on the right, you can schedule a demo. And obviously, we'd love to talk more about where you are on your AI journey. So I think, I mean, this has been fantastic. I'm still stunned by the, you know, person you spoke to with 20,000 shadow agents, Shawn. So that's going to stick in my mind, as well as the 27 different committees to get your GitHub Copilot approved. So 2 very compelling statistics in addition to what was shared in the research. So thank you both for the discussion. I've really appreciated it. And thank you everyone else for joining us, and look forward to chatting on the next one.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thanks, Eleanor. Great to be here.
Cheers. Have a good rest of your day.